This is the Nielsen Norman Group UX podcast. I'm Therese Fessenden. The end of the year is often a time for reflection on our professional and personal lives. We often consider, how we spent our time. Did we cultivate growth in the areas of our lives that mean the most to us? Or perhaps, are there relationships or behaviors that we'd prefer to stop doing to make room for growth that we actually care about? These are deep questions, but arguably the most important ones, and often ones that most UX professionals or product folks don't clearly answer as much as we think we do. So if I had to propose a resolution for our industry as we near the new year, maybe it's this. Let's choose success criteria that aren't superficial and focus on user outcomes that actually matter. To dive into this, I interviewed behavioral scientist Connor Joyce, who's recently authored the book Bridging Intention to Impact. In this episode, we discuss what behavioral science really is and some common misconceptions about it, how product and UX teams consistently overly rely upon problematic metrics, and tips for choosing more precise criteria and metrics to get more accurate perspectives of real user behavior and enact real change in the people we're meaning to serve. Here's Connor. I'm stoked to have you here because of your book, obviously. That's huge news. Congratulations. And I'm excited to talk about it because I feel like it's a much needed topic given everything I know about UX professionals, given everything I know about behavioral science. So definitely interested in unpacking all of that. But to get started, to give our audience a sense of who you are, what brought you to writing this book, I'd love to know a bit about you. So you're a behavioral scientist. What does that mean? What do you do?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I get pretty often, and I'm a behavioral scientist. I'm also a user researcher. I'm also a product developer. I like to say that behavioral science is as much a minor to other jobs as it is a major in itself. In other words, I bring my behavioral science skill set to a lot of the different roles that I've taken, whether it be in full-time roles or through consulting and startup work and advising. It's being a behavioral scientist is really just bringing the toolkit of understanding human behavior to be able to help create behavioral change in whatever the user is trying to do. And within the product space, that is what most of the different disciplines are trying to do, is we want our users to do something, because if they do that thing, hopefully then they'll purchase our platform or retain on the platform or whatever business outcome that is being pursued. And so for me, coming in with this behavioral science lens, I just have this specialty of thinking through, well, how do we actually get people to follow through with whatever intention that we're setting for them with the product experience?
That's super interesting. And I'm excited to talk about this more because I think by and large, UX and behavioral science have a lot in common. I mean, we're doing very similar things. We're carrying out user research. We're building user experiences. And behavioral science is really the deep dive into how we can motivate people to take certain actions and perhaps change behavior. And I think even the concept of behavior change is pretty amazing to talk about. So I'm excited to get into that. What do you think is a common misconception maybe that people have about behavioral science? Because I do think maybe some of that may play a role too in how we evaluate our impact when it comes to behavior change.
A lot of ways I can answer that question. And I'm going to say two quickly, and then I'm going to talk about a third that's closer to the work that I actually do. One is that behavioral science isn't manipulation. It can be, but it isn't by default manipulation. There is a lot of times when somebody wants to do something, but they can't. And it's because behavioral science at its core says that we are not perfect economic beings. We have faults. We fall into temptations. We're human. And so we can't always accomplish the goals that we set for ourselves. And behavioral science can be used to help with that. And in my book, that's not manipulation. Behavioral science is also not dark patterns, which in the design space is a manifestation of manipulation, or is the manifestation of using behavioral science techniques in a negative way. But there are also great techniques that one can use to create great features that help a user accomplish whatever goals they have. So I always like to level set and say behavioral science, it can be used for bad. And I'm not going to say it isn't or cannot, but it does not guarantee it's going to be used in a manipulative or a dark pattern type of way. So that's wanted to start with that just to clear that out, because that's a conversation that I get commonly. For me, how behavioral science, I don't even want to say is different than user research. I think that the place that they really come together and where behavioral science brings in that great evaluation, or what am I trying to say? The augmentation to user research is that behavioral science helps define a level deeper than a user outcome. User outcomes are the bread and butter of good design, good research, really understanding what that user wants to accomplish in their life. And if you do that correctly, you can build something that, again, ideally somebody, it will satisfy it, and then they will retain onto the platform. On the flip side, there is generally a need to better define how do you actually accomplish that user outcome. And there's a few frameworks out there. Again, design thinking can do that when you're going through the double diamond process, or you're really trying to distill the different solutions that are possible. Similarly, jobs to be done and outcome-driven innovation, those help you think about what exactly is the person trying to satisfy and how are they going to go about doing that. But defining the specific behaviors, the ones that yield a change to that user outcome, that is where I think behavioral science plays a really powerful role. And that is where it can be different than where traditional user research or user design ends, and it goes a level deeper. But that level deeper is a great place to play, because it sets you up with a whole set of new metrics that now you can be striving to. How are we actually going to design something to change that behavior with the confidence that it will yield the ideal both user and business outcomes that someone's aiming for?
That's really interesting, because I feel like there's two really important pieces here. There's the user outcome that you're mentioning, and there's also the concept of things broader than user outcomes. And I think it's even in the term user outcome, right? So there's often a lot of criticism in the realm of UX about like, these are people, these are human beings, they're not users, right? Some people often criticize like the only people who call their users are, the pharma industry and tech. And so I understand the sentiment in a way where users kind of fixates on a very specific context of use, literally like looking at a piece of technology. But we're looking kind of bigger in a way. We're thinking about outcomes perhaps in a person's life, maybe objectives, motivations they may have. And I do think we'll get into this as well, right? We're thinking a bit more broadly at some of these deeper core drives in a way. So we've certainly talked about design thinking in the past, and we are now also going to talk a bit about that in your book. That's a pretty big topic. I'd love to ask a bit about, design thinking is wonderful and amazing, and it's such a great framework. We teach it at NNG ourselves. One of the challenges, though, is cool. We have this research. We have these great designs we'd like to propose. How do we know whether we're actually moving in a direction that is making a positive impact? And it's hard to really know that we're doing that. I mean, there are metrics, there's qualitative research, there are ways we can gather that insight, but it can be hard to communicate that. And that cracks me up, because when I think about UX, we care so deeply about users. We care so much about good communication, and we are so bad at it ourselves. It's kind of ironic in a way. So I would love to know a bit, why are we so bad at this? Like, we've written a whole book about how we're so bad at this, not offending UX people, but just like product people, UX folks. Like, this is a huge, huge challenge for so many of us, enough that it's driven you to write a book. So could you share a little bit about like, what are some of the common issues with how we evaluate our impact when we make these designs?
So one is the difference between leading and lagging outcomes. We'll touch on that. Another ties back to what I was previously talking about, which are these behavioral outcomes. In other words, how much is a product changing behavior? And then the third one is really just having a solid feature definition to be able to talk about how research is influencing it. So I'm going to take these piece by piece, but I want to lay out those three pieces. So the first one is leading and lagging outcomes. Just like we have it for indicators of any sort of key performance indicator or OKR in more business lingo, behaviors are the same way. What makes Duolingo so powerful? It's because it does both create outcomes at the leading way. I want to go and keep my streak by keeping on or by completing a lesson. Or if we look at Peloton, I get a reward because I completed my class. The Apple rings. When I close it, I get a nice notification that says it. So all of these products, they do a really good job encouraging somebody to pursue whatever actions are needed to satisfy that leading outcome. Just get a task done, get a lesson done, get a workout done, etc. But those leading outcomes tie into lagging outcomes. In Duolingo's case, it's learning a new language. In Peloton or the Apple Watch, it is losing weight or getting increased fitness or whatever the person's attempting to do with their workouts. Mm-hmm. So that's the first piece, is that that nuanced separation, I think, is very important to say. We need to satisfy somebody so every time they use that product, they're going to be feeling a little bit better. So that in the long run, through usage of the product, it's actually going to do something for them. It's going to help them learn that language. It's going to help them lose weight or accomplish their fitness goal or whatever the product's intent is. That difference between the leading and lagging is an important piece. The next one is, to do that, you have to measure those behaviors. Like I previously said, a lot of the times teams that I work with will end their definition of a feature by saying it is going to satisfy this outcome. And I'll say, well, how? Well, that's the design part. We're going to figure that out with the design. But no, that's not the design part. Yes, you need to design the solution, but you actually should first define what behavior is being changed by whatever solution is going to be created. And only with that level of definition are you then able to design a solution that will maximize those measurable behaviors. In a fitness example, this would be measuring how many calories are burned each workout, and then designing a feature to increase those calories burned over time. In the Duolingo case, and I'm not a Duolingo user myself, but let's just, for the sake of the example, it would be every time ensuring that person advances ever so slightly in their ability to learn that new language. You would need to be able to learn what behaviors are tied to that so that that could be measured in whatever solution is designed. So you've got the leading and the lagging outcomes. To really do that, you need to be able to define the behaviors. That fits into that last piece, is to truly define the behaviors. You really actually have to have a definition for the feature. How is this feature fitting into our overall product to help that user achieve those behaviors that then connect to those outcomes? And that is the thesis of my book, is what I call the user outcome connection. It's specific behaviors, when changed, lead to a user outcome, ideally both a leading and a lagging user outcome. It's helping them do something today that will make them feel better tomorrow. And then in the end, it's going to drive business success, because that person's going to go, oh, this weight loss app, it's actually helping me lose weight. Or, oh, this language learning app, I'm actually learning this new language. And so they'll retain, they'll tell their friends, which will increase organic marketing, and they'll be a great target to upsell them, or ultimately they're just loyal customers.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And for those folks who are listening who maybe aren't as familiar with the design thinking framework, one of the key components, at least one of the key components we talk about at Nielsen Norman Group, is the importance of especially the first kind of third of that process. The first third of that process involves a lot of understanding and defining the problem. And to your point, what you were mentioning earlier, Connor, about how we often are like, okay, this is the user outcome, or we're going to design, a feature, and then we're going to evaluate based on the design. In a way, you're saying, hey, hold on, we can't really evaluate our success by designing and then choosing an evaluation criteria. We have to figure out, what is our outcome? What is our evaluation criteria for that outcome? And then the design follows afterward, right? And and it kind of needs to be something factored into why we're even making these decisions in the first place. So thinking about, we kind of have this exercise in the design thinking class about, what does this person need? And we introduce this activity by showing an image of a little girl kind of reaching for a book. It's a very popular exercise, but it's a little girl tiptoeing, reaching for a book on a top shelf. And so by all, objective observation, you might say, well, she's tiptoeing. She needs a way to reach the book. So like she needs a step stool. Or if we want to just jump to what she really needs, it's the book on the shelf. That's what she's reaching for. Okay, those are both valid answers, right? There's, in a way, we're saying that's the feature, right? That's the feature that she needs. She needs the step stool. She needs the book. But then when we really unpack that, why does she need the book? Well, the book is not the outcome, right? The outcome is what she's going to do with that book. Is she going to read the book? And then when she reads, what's it for? Is it for a book report, or is it for just she likes books and she's excited about it, right? Those are some of the deeper questions that really good user researchers, like they know that's the nugget of wisdom that's going to help them make a really impactful solution. And so I appreciate that idea of the leading and the lagging outcome, because maybe the leading outcome is she reaches for and gets the book, but the lagging outcome might be she learns, she improves in school, or whatever that may be. So I feel like that's a really important point to hammer home in how we evaluate success. What are some issues in how people choose, what they evaluate or what they're measuring, I guess, to put it? Since I say success criteria, not just thinking about metrics, but naturally metrics is where people kind of gravitate. So I'm just curious if you could kind of talk about it from the perspective of like choosing the wrong metrics. Like, can you give an example of what would be like a wrong metric when thinking about some of these, outcomes?
To really answer that question, I'm going to take it one step back and then I'll bring it back to the question. It starts with making sure you're choosing the right behaviors that are connected to that user outcome. Because if you choose the wrong behaviors, like if we say like a weight loss app, really the more science is showing weight loss is not exercise, it's eating behaviors. You can exercise a lot, but if you're still overeating, it's not going to have that much of an impact. So you could build the best weight or exercising app out there, and it still may not be what is needed to achieve that outcome. So if you choose the wrong behaviors, then you could maximize every success metric, but it may still not actually impact that outcome. So it starts with choosing the right behaviors, and that process is not easy. So that's the biggest thing is people say, well, this doesn't sound very easy, and it's not. But building product isn't easy, and if you think it is, then you're probably over tooling on building for usage and not actually building for impact. In the book, I talk about two processes. On one side, you can use things like ethnographic studies, where you literally go and watch people. How are you trying to solve this problem today? You can do user interviews. You can do a lot of the good work that many user researchers are out there doing right now is actually already very close to trying to do behavioral analysis. You just need to take it a step further and really actually kind of ask them, how are you currently solving this today? What would it look like to try to solve it doing this behavior? The other resource is that generative AI actually does this really well. I have been pleasantly surprised by the perspective taking that the systems are able to do. If you go in there and you say, my user outcome or my goal is, I want to meditate more often. How do I go about doing that? Give me 10 suggestions. It's going to give you 10 decent behaviors that could be changed to help you meditate. Are all of those the right ones? No. That's where research is still needed. Testing is still needed. It's not a silver bullet. It still is challenging, but generative AI will do a great job pulling in, especially if you use it where it's giving you resources like within ChatGPT search or within Perplexity or one of these. They're going to give you a lot of ideas that are sourced that you can go and experiment and see with our real users. Do they think that having a dedicated spot in their house where they meditate will help them? And if so, we could build a feature that helps them do that during the onboarding experience of this app. So it's those types of questions that focus on finding the right behaviors. Then once you find the right behaviors, to circle back to your question of how do you define the success metrics, it's just about building the closest metric you can to that behavior. Now, having that person build a dedicated spot in their house for meditation, you may not be able to have that guaranteed event level, or in other words, like technically build a metric that says whether or not that happens because it's happening outside of the digital environment. But you can build a proxy. You can maybe have them take a picture when they're setting up their profile for their account that shows their dedicated spot. And if they don't never upload a picture, you can say, well, they probably never followed through with that step. You could ask them, collect attitudinal data, have it be at the end of a meditation session. Did you do this in your dedicated meditation spot? And even, if we're going to get wonky, you could try to find it in some way within the product to be able to measure that. Maybe if the gyro sensor on a phone is laying it down, you at least know that person put it on a table or something. We get creative is what I ultimately say is once you've defined those behaviors, if the behaviors take place in a digital environment, you're gold. All you need to do is throw in, whether it be mParticle or segment or another event level collection system to get that very fine behavioral data. You know what that person is doing in any of your surfaces, and you can measure that behavior down to the finest of levels. If it is happening outside of your environment, you do have to get creative, but it's all about finding proxies. Is you just try to find what data can we pull in? What could we have the user do that would show us this, whatever that might be. And then in the worst case scenario, you ask the user, and then they will always be able to tell you whether or not that behavior was taken. Now, granted, they don't always tell you anything. And that's why attitudinal data can be hard, is they don't have to tell you. But nonetheless, hopefully that paints the picture of how choosing the right success metrics starts with defining the right behaviors and then finding the metric that matters, which would be like that event level. And if that can't exist, then it's building a proxy that gets as close as possible to that.
I think that insight is super helpful. And I also appreciate what you said about, and I think the phrase you used was over-tooling on usage data, which is so interesting to me because I think usage data is something people really, really zero in on, or we immediately point to, say, analytics. And granted, like you're saying, if the interaction takes place in that digital space, perhaps there are going to be certain analytic data, you can reference, like, is the objective to be more productive? Okay, maybe there are some pieces or proxies of that. So an example might be, is this person sending more emails? Are they creating more calendar events? One might argue that's productive. Is me having 50 calendar events in a day productive? Debatable, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not. But that's a really important question, right? Is this the best proxy? And it does introduce some really philosophical questions, like what even is productivity? Or if we are creating, say, a mindfulness app, to use your example, is someone achieving more mindfulness? That's a really difficult question to answer. And if you were to take a metric to define that, maybe you could use some, like you said, some attitudinal survey data. We could ask someone like, how are you feeling today? Do you feel like you are more mindful now than before? Right. And it's also a bit hard to not ask it in a leading way either, right? To make sure people are answering honestly and reflecting. So it is hard. Like you said, it is hard to get this data. It is hard to build a product, and it's even harder to get accurate representation of true user outcomes, right? That and really seeing, are we making that measurable difference? And in a way, I'm also really glad we're having this conversation too, because like I said, there is this fixation with analytics, partially because it is easy to get. And I think it's certainly a better place to go than not getting any sort of measurable data. But I like this conversation in that hopefully it can kind of instigate this creative thought of, where else can I look, right? Or what other sources of data can I perhaps start gathering to ensure that I am looking at a realistic success criteria, right? So yeah, this is amazing. Now, one other thing to take this idea of research, right? You mentioned the importance of research in evaluating features, perhaps research like ethnographic research. And it certainly sounds like a combination of both qualitative and quantitative, analysis are useful here, because it can give you, in a way, like a sense of triangulation. You could say, okay, I can see this qualitatively. I see people are carrying out these particular tasks, or have these particular concerns, or have these particular barriers. And I can also, validate that perhaps with some of these other survey data type things. Do you see any particular issues with how people run this sort of evaluative research, like whether their features that they're building are actually making that impact?
I think the most common mistake that I see in the evaluative research is not matching the evaluation technique to what is necessary. And it happens on both sides. I have seen we have to go in and test if this feature is working to the point where we have statistical significance and we know down to the finest detail. When the product team was like, hey, can you just give us a pulse and let us know if we're heading in the right direction? So way too overscoped. I've also seen the flip side of, okay, well, let's get this feature in front of 5 users and just ask them if they think they'd change their behavior from using this. And the team's like, we're about to invest in scaling this across, the full product. We really want to know the direction of this. So to your earlier point, I believe all good research has both a mix of attitudinal and behavioral metrics. And to your earlier point, I do believe the biggest mistake in modern product management is the over focus on usage. I also believe usage has a role to play. It is a indicator, as is satisfaction. You could build something that is tremendous at changing behavior, but if nobody likes it, they're probably not going to use it. And then it's going to sit on a shelf somewhere and it's never going to actually achieve its goal. So it's within the evaluation, my gold rule is try to do as many levels of outcomes that you can. In my book, I talk about 5. There's usage, which we talked about. There's usability, which is satisfaction, ease of use, the ones that a lot of UX researchers, it's kind of their bread and butter. There's behavioral, which we've talked about a decent amount here. This is, are you changing those behaviors? There's user outcomes. That is any of those leading or lagging outcomes. And then there's business outcomes. And this is the piece that I also see that is not that common in evaluative research, but it is, are we sure that when we satisfy that user outcome, people are actually going to do what the business desires? Again, retention, upgrades, increased loyalty, whatever that might be. And so it is about, in my opinion, to the actual question that you said of mistakes, I would say mistakes is over focusing on one metric and then not scoping the evaluative research to really create the level of evidence that is necessary for the decision to be made on both sides. Again, this is sometimes overscoping, sometimes underscoping. And then my remedy for it is to try to include as many layers of metrics as possible, really try to get those 5 levels of success metrics, as I call them. And then as you're designing the study, designing the evaluative piece, understanding what is the team actually asking for, and then scoping the research in a way where I've heard the name minimum viable research recently, which I'm digging, because it's like, what is the minimum research that we can do here to create the level of evidence that is necessary for this team to move forward? And if you do that, and at the same time you scope in as many of those levels of metrics as possible, I think that is the path to help, to not just helping the team make the decision, but building their trust that research is playing a role where they're able to contribute to the product development and the business outcomes.
The concept of minimum viable research is one I'm also very excited about, but it's funny because when I talk to some researchers, like you could sort of see this look of mild horror on people's faces, like, what? Less research? We already don't do enough research. And it's like, I understand both sides of that coin. Because there are plenty of organizations that, especially now in the age of AI, are just like, why would I do research when I can just ask ChatGPT to give me like the top user needs? And it's like, I think especially in the age of AI, that's super relevant and super helpful because maybe now there's even less desire to pay for this when there's a belief that, well, I can get this from AI. But if you could say, hey, if you do just a little bit more and it's not going to cost you very much, then you are going to have even stronger, more impactful insights. And not only that, like you're saying, it's going to help give the team a sense of, wow, I'm going to have a lot more direction here. Or, wow, the impact of the product I'm developing I get to see that. I get to see that qualitatively by watching a usability study and seeing someone, their face light up because something is working properly, or the opposite. I can see someone really struggling, and that's giving me, lighting a fire under my team to help us want to improve this, make it even better. So minimum viable research, I feel like, is a really important component. But then the other piece of this is you mentioned those 5 levels of success metrics, and how as long as you have those layers, you're keeping a well-rounded perspective. And the thing that came to mind immediately, especially when talking about zeroing in on things like usage, is Campbell's Law, which, if you don't know about Campbell's Law, it's basically the more important a metric is in decision making, the more likely it is to be manipulated or gamed in some way. So some examples might be, maybe you finished a customer support call and someone's like, hey, you're going to get a survey. It would really help me in retaining my job if you could answer the survey. And then because now you, the caller, are like, oh no, this person might get fired if I don't answer this, or if I don't answer this positively, it may kind of skew your answers to be a bit more positive than maybe it actually was, right? So that may be a particular problem, especially when we fixate on a singular metric, right? If a person gets penalized because of a singular metric, or a person is incentivized, maybe a bonus structure hinges entirely on, did we up our number of users who signed up, or did we increase usage time overall? Then that may encourage some of the more nefarious behaviors, kind of the ones you were saying earlier, the dark patterns, the manipulative or deceptive types of patterns, right? That gets incentivized now because that's how I'm going to get my bonus at the end of the year. So I think you're right. Having this multi-layered perspective helps to avoid some of the ethical dilemmas that may come from, overly emphasizing a singular metric, and perhaps even gets us closer to better proxies of actually creating more impactful, designs that people like using, creating that organic marketing that you mentioned earlier.
100%. I agree with all of that. And I would even just, highlight, I like that Campbell's Law. I think the last time I heard it, I should say, was in an NNG course I was taking. So it was good reminder, because it is such an important piece. And it's why I think usage is such it's again, I'm not saying it should never be used, because it is you need to build something that is used, but it's such an easy metric. It's the default metric that people just want to clamor onto it, and then they maximize it. And then the VC for startups or the market for public companies say, ooh, growth. We like growth. We know what that means. And so then they maximize it more. And then everybody's just building for usage. And then when retention starts to drop, they'll go, well, wait a second. We might even still be growing, but now we're not retaining people. And at some point, we're going to saturate this pool of users. What is going wrong? And that's the first time that the team asks, well, is what we're building actually working for our users? And that's a very, very late time to be asking that question.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you're saying, very late. We've already disappointed, in a way, lots of people, right? And
Yes.
That's not the time to be defining these things. Certainly earlier in the process is better. So I have a couple more questions, one of which is about this impact mindset, which is a mindset you talk about in your book. Could you share a little bit about what that mindset is and how people can start to cultivate this sort of mindset in their day-to-day work?
Yeah. The impact mindset is we've been talking about the impact mindset. It starts with the user outcome connection. That is, again, defining every feature based on the specific behaviors that it's going to change or is changing, how that connects to a user outcome, and then how that will eventually create a business impact. That user outcome connection, why I believe it's so powerful, is it starts by giving definition to a feature. And I've already talked about why that's great for helping create metrics. It's also great because it aligns the team around what needs to be done. There's many times I've talked to teams and say, why exactly are you building that feature? And people they look at each other and they go, well, this customer asked for it, or we think we need something that's going to do something over here. And then I push them a little bit more and realize, well, a definition would be really helpful for creating alignment within this team. User outcome connection is the main foundation of the impact mindset. because it also creates a need for evidence. Because within that user outcome connection, each connection needs to be validated. There needs to be evidence that says that if you change your behavior, it will satisfy that outcome. If you satisfy an outcome, it will create a business impact. And then you also need evidence that says our feature is actually changing that behavior. So there's 3 assumptions that are inherent to defining a feature using that user outcome connection. And that's the next part of the impact mindset is you need to go out and validate those assumptions. And that's what I call the feature impact analysis. And it's the bulk of the book because it is a step-by-step process for how to increase experimentation and research within a company by defining your features with the user outcome connection and then going out and either finding or creating the evidence needed to be able to ultimately validate that the user outcome connection is correct. So the team can confidently invest in a feature, knowing it is changing behavior, it is satisfying both user and business outcomes. Beyond that, there is the fact that the more research you do, you want to have a home to put those insights in. And so I call that an insights hub. Some people like to call it a research repository. There's more conversation. I'm not the only person that's talking about this. But my addition to that is that it shouldn't just be for research. It should be where the home of where features are defined too. So again, it's where you say, here is what we believe our features are doing. Here is the evidence that is directly tied to why we believe that that is true. And then the last piece is if you do all of this, it is leaning the company towards an evidence-based decision-making culture. Because instead of creating a feature just because one loud customer suggested it or because a product manager is leading with their intuition, you're building features because you are confident that you're going to be changing behaviors that you know do create impact that you desire.
Absolutely. And I guess one last question I have for you is, do you have any tips for people who are looking to start, who may be a bit apprehensive of stepping on like leadership's toes, if they maybe maybe leadership has actually zeroed in on usage, right? I know you mentioned usage is a good thing. So obviously it seems like tip number 1 is don't throw everything out of the window, but what other tips can you share for, getting the rest of your team to start embracing the same mindset?
Start retroactively. That's what I did. The very first time that I thought about these ideas when I was in my master's, and then I wind up at a company out of my master's, and I wanted to test these ideas out, and I started to pitch them, and I got little support at first to that point, because the company I was at was really focused on usage and satisfaction, not as much about these outcomes. So how I found success was I went to a feature that we had already launched. Instead of trying to get this baked in proactively, I went and found a feature, and I asked the team to do this type of analysis where we would go and define the behaviors that feature was supposed to be changing and then measure those. And lo and behold, it was working. We now had behavioral data that showed that the feature was successful at accomplishing the behavioral change that we hoped for. And that became an opportunity for our marketing team to reference that during sales. It was at a B2B company. So we were able to have our marketing team go out and tell potential customers, we are building features we are confident are working at accomplishing why you are purchasing this software. And that was valuable to the point where the team said, well, maybe we should integrate more of this into the proactive feature development process. And I was slowly able to integrate some of this thinking into how we actually built product from the ground up. And so that would be today, the 2 recommendations I would say is start retroactively and don't think you need to have everybody on board. You really just need 2 people. You need one person to do the work of defining all these features. And then you need a data scientist or a data engineer or an engineer overall to go and build the new metrics. And if you have the right systems in place, it shouldn't be that much of an effort to do it, but you'll just need somebody that has some technical know-how to be able to gather some of these metrics. And so start there and let that seed organically grow, because by asking the right questions, you're going to find other people who want to answer the questions.
That's a really good way to put it, because it's rare that someone like hears a great question and is just like, how dare you ask that question? It's more like, wow, I've never thought of it that way, right? Or, maybe we should learn, right? So I agree. I think maybe instead of framing it as we have the wrong metrics, like don't go that way, but instead start asking questions like, do we know if people actually do this, right?
Yes.
That's actually how we started asking questions at NNG as well. Do we know if people are applying the skills that we teach? How do we learn that? And this is kind of an ongoing experiment. This is something we're constantly trying to learn about. And it may not be easy to get the exact answers like you're saying, but maybe even a close proxy. But certainly asking the right questions is a great place to start. So Connor, thank you. You've given me a ton of food for thought. Time has flown by. I know we're even a little over time. But just to close, if anyone wants to learn more about you and your book, could you share a little bit about where people can find more information about you and how to get this book?
Yeah, so the book is Bridging Intention to Impact. You can find it on any major retailer, Amazon, Peach Pit, Barnes and Nobles. I'm on LinkedIn, and that's where my main home. I also write on Medium, and I write for a collection of publications. But if you want to just see what I'm up to, what I'm publishing, the home is for LinkedIn. And then I have a company, Desired Outcome Labs. So if there's any interest in working with me or working through some of the things that we talked about in this show, you can reach out to me through that channel also.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Connor. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you today. It's given me a lot to think about as well. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Therese. You too.
That was Connor Joyce. You can find more information about him and his book, Bridging Intention to Impact, at the links in our show notes. If you want more insights on user behavior, measuring and communicating the impact of your work, and many more related UX topics, check out our website and you'll find thousands of free articles and videos. You can also take half-day and full-day courses from people like myself and other amazing UX experts. Go to www.nngroup.com. That's NNGROUP.com. Finally, if you like this show and want to support our work, please leave a rating and follow or subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. This show is hosted and executive produced by me, Therese Fessenden. All editing and post-production is by Chrissy Richardson. That's it for today's show. Until next time, remember, keep it simple.